Our group name is Belong Together, and we are presenting the Abuse, Awareness, and Prevention Guidelines. The guidelines are split into two parts, abuse awareness and abuse prevention. The first part discusses the needs of the patient who are or have experienced a form of interpersonal violence. The second is making sure RTs do not commit abuse or harassment and reporting protocols if it is encountered, which includes our professional conduct. At the beginning of the guidelines, they start by defining key terms used throughout. One we felt important to make sure everyone understood was abuse. The CRTO defines abuse as treating others in a harmful or offensive way, including but not limited to physical, verbal, emotional, financial, cyber, and sexual abuse. During our presentation, we will be giving you two scenarios that have to do with the abuse guidelines. Appropriate responses will be revealed at the end and discussed during the Q&A, but we would like for you to think about what you would do during the presentation. For scenario 1, a staff RT is responsible for supervising an RT student, and they develop a friendly relationship. They begin following each other on Twitter and commenting on each other's tweets, initially in a good-mannered. After a few weeks, however, the RT tweets become increasingly personal. The SRT feels uncomfortable with these interactions, but is afraid to speak up or unfollow the RT for fear of offending him and jeopardizing her clinical rotation. What would you suggest to them?
Anyway, so the primary purpose of this guideline is to satisfy the Regulated Health Professionals Act, or RHPA. To give you a bit more detail, the RHPA requires that all health regulatory colleges have measures for preventing and dealing with sexual abuse of patients and clients, and also encouraging the reporting of such abuse. However, the CRTO, they take it one step further, and they also cover more than just sexual abuse. So again, verbal, physical, emotional, etc. But moving on. So when you look at the guidelines, there's going to be these sections, so definitions, abuse awareness, abuse prevention, and members' responsibility regarding abuse prevention. So the first section you'll see is the definition section. Here, it's just going to define abuse. It's also going to differentiate between verbal, physical, emotional, cyber, financial, and sexual abuse, like we mentioned once again. It will also differentiate between a member, a non-patient client, and a patient client. The guideline also differentiates between sexual abuse, assault, harassment, and misconduct. So the next section is abuse awareness. Here, it just aims to increase understanding of the needs of patients / clients experiencing or have experienced interpersonal violence. The next section, abuse prevention. This here just has guidelines to ensure that RTs do not commit abuse and that they report it when it does occur. It also has expectations of professional relationships, so professional conduct, basically. The next section is the members' responsibilities regarding abuse prevention. Here you'll just see the reporting obligations, so suspected abuse. You'll also see the penalties for abusing a patient. You'll also see the consequences for failing to report, and the responsibilities related to the Child and Family Services Act. And we'll just cover this in more detail later on. All right. So I'm going to give you the second scenario. Again, just think about your responsibilities as an RT. So it goes, a child is brought into emergency with a severe asthma exacerbation. Upon X-ray, it is noted that he has lateral and posterior rib fractures that are highly specific for abuse. The healthcare team discusses their suspicions of abuse, and the RT assumes that the physician or one of the nurses will file a report with the CAS.
So now that we've given you the scenario, I'm going to talk a little bit about legislations. There are two legislations that are relevant to this guideline. The first legislation is the Regulated Health Professions Act, also known as RHPA, which Tom briefly talked about. The second is the Child and Family Services Act. This is referenced as the CFSA. The Regulated Health Professions Act was created to ensure that all colleges in Ontario have preventative measures and an education program to teach healthcare professionals about sexual assault. The law included in this act states that all healthcare workers are responsible for reporting any suspicion of sexual assault against patients. It is a legal offense to not report any sign of sexual assault, abuse, or anything that may fit. This is a relevant legislation because all respiratory therapists are required by the CRTO to report any type of abuse, assault, whether it be sexual, physical, mental, or verbal. The second legislation is the Child and Family Services Act. It is about protecting the well being of children. It also lays a heavy emphasis on promoting the well being of children under the age of 16. The law regarding to this act is how everyone has a duty to protect children and keep them out of harm by reporting any notion or speculation that they have about the child's well being. It is irrelevant to respiratory therapists because all healthcare professionals already have a legal responsibility to report any speculation of abuse, neglect, or harm to a child. Speculations that must be reported are things like harm, neglect, sexual abuse, lack of care, neglect of medical treatment, and being abandoned.
So, one point our group found interesting about the guidelines was the requirement to wait 1 year after the last influence over a patient or treatment before they are no longer considered your patient. So, this also has to do with waiting a year before engaging in a relationship with them. Another point made between the power imbalance was between an RRT and an SRT. An RRT cannot have a personal relationship with the student, as it is considered unprofessional and could be considered sexual misconduct, leading to the RRT certification being taken away. On this slide are the consequences for failing to report an abuse. The guidelines also express that anyone making the report in good faith and on reasonable belief is protected from retaliation. Therefore, you should not be afraid or hesitant to report a situation over fear of losing your job.
So, the scenario one answer for anybody that's been thinking about it is the RRT has a responsibility to keep a professional relationship with their SRT. They should not engage in any sort of relationship that could make their student feel uncomfortable. And if any claim is reported against them, it is at their own fault. The scenario to answer two. If a child is brought in or anybody is brought in with signs of abuse or assault, it is the responsibility of every health team member to report. You cannot expect that one team member is going to do it and that you don't need to. Everybody is expected to report. These are our references. There's only one. It was just the journal article or the PPG. And does anybody have any questions for us?